Hey everybody, it's Rabbi Fohrman here. So, if you were like me, every year you probably set aside a little bit of time before Pesach to look over the Haggadah. You want to have something to share with your guests or your family about the Haggadah when the Seder night finally arrives. The good news is that you can count your video watching time right now as part of that Seder prep. But I am going to tell you right off the bat that, to paraphrase Manish Donna, this Seder preparation will be a little bit different this year than all other years. Because typically, what do you sort of do when you look to prepare for the Seder? Well, think of what Divrei Torah at the Seder often look like. They tend to be very particular, very local. Often you look at an isolated bit of the Seder, say the four sons, or that little story with Rabbi Akiva and the sages sitting around the table in Bnei Brak, and you try to find some little nugget of inspiration that you can share around the table about that particular part of the Seder. So what kind of a Seder ends up evolving out of that? Well, maybe something along these lines. Kadesh! All right, everybody gather around for Kiddush. And Kiddush, it all feels very nice and communal. Everyone listens to the sonorous melody of the Kiddush, and you drink your wine. Then you eat this little bit of parsley or potato dipped in salt water. You break the matzah, you show it around. And then you listen to little Jimmy or little Debbie or little Beryl and little Chani standing on the chair, tenuously reciting the four questions as best as he or she can from memory, in Yiddish sometimes, or in English or Sanskrit or whatever. But you got the point. And then you got to sing a song. Avadim hayinu, hayinu. Songs are fun. And then little Chani, she wants to put on a skit with her cousins about those rabbis in Bnei Brak, and everybody watches and they clap. And then one of the kids has a question. Daddy, how come the wise son's question sounds so much like the wicked son's? Good question, Beryl. Let's talk about it. Before you know it, another song. V'hi shamda lavotenu. And then, you put the wine cup down, and so it goes. Until you get to the hard part. The hard part are those really difficult to follow paragraphs a bit later on in Maggid. At that point, things often devolve into what I call a mumble, stop routine. Everybody kind of mumbles a few paragraphs to themselves, and then stop, Dvar Torah. Then mumble some more, and then you get to a song, mumble some more. And soon people are getting tired, and then you pick up the pace. Mumble song, mumble Dvar Torah, mumble song. Then finally, mumble Dayenu, and yay, we made it through Maggid. You chomp your way through some matzah, some maror, and you arrive gratefully at Shulchan Aruch, the matzah ball soup, the brisket. Things are good now. And that's all very sweet. It really is. But here's the issue. When you sort of mumble your way through difficult paragraphs, you'll sort of lose the larger picture. You can end up having an entire mumble stop Seder without actually understanding what you're really saying. And when I say that you won't have a basic understanding of what you're saying, I don't mean you won't be able to translate any given word, phrase, or even a sentence. You will, but what you'll be missing is an understanding of how it all hangs together. How does line A lead to line B? How does paragraph C connect to paragraph D? And that stuff's important. You read an article in the New York Times or some other newspaper. What do you do when you read the article? Consciously or not, your brain's asking, what is that first paragraph doing? What's it talking about? And how does it connect to the second paragraph? And you keep on reading the article that way, and those are the questions you ask. But imagine you were reading that article and you couldn't actually make heads or tails of how one idea led to the next. But then instead of trying to figure that out, you turn to the person next to you and you say, hey, did you notice that it says because in this paragraph, not once, but twice? Let me tell you a fascinating idea I once heard about that. That sounds kind of absurd, right? So let's not do that with the Haggadah. I grant you, when it comes to the Haggadah, reading comprehension is harder than it is with the New York Times. The Haggadah is a rabbinic text that's many centuries old, written in the style of, and about the same time as, a piece of Breita or Talmud. And these texts aren't meant to just be read, they're meant to be studied. And the way you study such texts is really to focus on the main things that any of us focus on subconsciously when you read the newspaper. For each paragraph you ask, what was that paragraph about? What was its main point? What was its purpose? And then you ask yourself, how does that paragraph connect to the paragraphs around it? Paragraph before it, the paragraph after it. What's the flow here? So in the videos that follow, we're going to do exactly this with the text of the Haggadah. Dive in with me and let's begin to look at the main part of the Haggadah, that section known as Maggid. Maggid. The word literally means retelling a story. This supposedly is the part of the Haggadah dedicated to actually retelling the Exodus story. But look how it begins. Ha-lachma anya. This is the bread of affliction, poor man's bread, the bread we used to eat in Egypt. This is the part where we hold up the matzah for everybody to see and we explain what it is. What's the main point of this paragraph? Well, we seem to be quite literally pointing to and explaining a central symbol of the Seder that's about to unfold. Here is the matzah. Here's what it means. All right, that's great, but let's ask ourselves a reading comprehension question over here. What's this doing here? We're supposed to be telling a story, right? Pointing at matzah doesn't seem to be telling a story. But maybe we are beginning a story in a certain kind of way. We're pointing to a concrete thing, a food, that's going to tell the story to come, not just in words, but in flavors and in textures. The matzah is setting the tone, or the flavor, if you will, for the story to come. So maybe it is a reasonable way to begin the Seder. All right. The next paragraph is Manish Donna, 4 questions, in which a child remarks on how very different this night seems from others during the year. How is this paragraph connected to the last one? Well, we just held up the matzah, we called everybody's attention to one of the main symbols of the night, and our children notice that there's something out of the ordinary going on tonight. They want to understand. In a sense, these questions create the opportunity for a story that we will soon tell. All right, so Manish Donna isn't yet the story, it's a precursor to it. The story we tell is going to be couched as an answer to a set of questions. This question and answer format is a pedagogical model that the rabbis lay out in the Talmud. We, as parents, have an obligation to tell the story of the Exodus to our kids. But the rabbis knew that the best way to engage children is to first give them the opportunity to ask their own questions. So this paragraph is giving the children a chance to do just that, helping them get engaged in the story we're about to tell. All right, let's move on. The next paragraph is Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and God took us out of there. Wait a minute, that seems like a story. Has Maggid, the storytelling part of the Haggadah, really finally begun? Well, in a sense it has. When we say that one sentence, we have, in essence, just told the entire story. We were once slaves, now we're free. So you might be thinking, if we've gone and done that already, if that's the story, well, we've finished our business, let's just close up shop and bring out the soup and brisket, let the meal begin. Why don't we do that? Well, maybe the rest of the paragraph here is actually explaining why we don't just do that. The next thing we say in the Haggadah is, had God not taken us out, we'd still be in Egypt. In other words, these events that happened so long ago, they're not just bygone events in history, mere curiosities of times past. They have profound consequences for you and me sitting right here, right now. If it were not for the Exodus, Israel as an independent nation would never have come to be. We would have been a perpetual class of slaves, and eventually we'd have probably assimilated into the host culture. You and I would never be sitting here today had the Exodus not happened, and therefore, we need to do more than perfunctorily dispense with the story. It's not enough to just summarize the Exodus story in a line and move on to the meal. No matter how knowledgeable or wise we all are, no matter how many times we've heard the story before, we need to elaborate on it, flesh it out, make it come alive. We need to delve into the story because it's this story that changed everything for us. The author of the Haggadah here is providing a rationale for what comes next, a reason why the meal won't be coming yet for another few hours. In other words, this paragraph is really the beginning of a meta-story, a story about the telling of the Exodus story. Here's why we do things this way, little Jimmy and little Debbie. We are learning why the story is important and why we're going to spend a lot of time telling it. So what happens next? Do we start telling the Exodus story now? Well, no, actually we don't. The next paragraphs actually continue the Metastory. They continue to talk about telling the Exodus story. We get a little episode about some sages from the Talmud and Bnei Brak who told the Exodus story on the Seder night in so much depth and detail that they stayed up all night doing it. And that paragraph is really just illustrating the last point, right? That no matter how much you know, you just have to lose yourself in the telling of the Exodus story. It has to be all-encompassing. The Metastory then continues with the next paragraph in the Haggadah, the 4 sons. You see, if the previous paragraph told us how much to tell the Exodus story, this next paragraph tells us how to tell the story. Because the rabbis noticed that the Torah tells you not once, but 4 different times that you have to tell the Exodus story to your kids. From there, they drew the idea that there are actually 4 different ways to tell the story. The story needs to be tailored to the needs of the listener, to the needs of each kid. In all of these paragraphs, and for that matter the ones that follow, we're not yet really getting to the actual story of the Exodus. We're telling the meta-story. We're being given pointers as to how to tell the Exodus story. We don't have anything that really sounds like an Exodus story in the Haggadah until we get to these words. Metchila, Ovdei Avodah Zarah hayu avotenu. Once upon a time, our ancestors were idol worshippers. Well, that's a proper way to start a story, quite literally with once upon a time. And in fact, the Exodus story really does begin at this moment, at least in a way. Yeah, we're starting from all the way at the beginning, even before Abraham, and yeah, there are still some confusing paragraphs in the Haggadah beyond this point, but it does seem fair to say that the meta-story is now over. The actual story is beginning. This is where the action really begins. So as you sit down to the Seder this year, keep your eye on the ball. Until now, we talked about how important it is to retell the Exodus, how much we have to retell it, how we have to retell it, when you have to retell it, but we haven't yet actually retold it until right here. This is the beginning. So how does that affect you? Well, at your Seder, it's easy to entertain lots of questions in Divrei Torah about those introductory pieces. Why Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's beard was so white, was only 18 years old, and all that. But there's a price to pay for those indulgences. You get up to this point where we're at now, Mitchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah hayu avotenu, and by now the kids are getting restless, the guests are hungry. In front of you there's this dense and intimidating section of rabbinical analysis. So, if you're not careful, it's, come on folks, we got an afikoman to eat by midnight, let's move. My advice, try not to fall into that trap. Say fewer Divrei Torah on the introductory parts, and make sure you get up to here, fully awake and ready to go. Because remember, the story starts here. Don't let it pass you by. In the next videos of this course, we're going to tackle the next paragraphs of the Haggadah. These are some of the hardest to understand paragraphs in the Haggadah. It's not easy to figure out exactly how these paragraphs hang together, what story they're meant to tell, but if we can piece together that puzzle, we'll find ourselves richly rewarded. We'll get an inside look at the Exodus story as the rabbis beckoned us to see it. We will, I dare say, begin to see a side of the Exodus story that we never imagined existed before.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. We hope you really enjoyed our Passover video. To watch the rest of this series and to get a printable guide for your Seder, go to alephbeta.org/Haggadah or click the link below. And while you're down there, make sure to share with friends and family. Thanks, happy Passover.